Hi, Matt. You got to show your
Hello.
socks. We'll start out with the
I,
sock showing. Sock
sock
showing.
showing. I'm a
And
little bit
then we'll
nervous
get
about
started.
this.
So if you haven't joined us before, Matt has probably the most interesting collection of socks on the planet. So, close to it, if not. But yeah, this is one of his things. So
It's a fun thing. If anybody wants to check me out, I'm the shoeless therapist on Instagram. So, okay. So these socks are actually really thick. Um,
oh,
so you can
oh,
see it
those are nice. Yeah,
it
big
has a
old elk.
moose on it,
Oh, it's
right?
a
Or
moose. Okay,
I think
I was
it's a
thinking it was an
moose.
elk. I don't know.
And then, but it's really the Aurora Borealis,
Oh,
right? And this top
nice.
sock says Alaska.
Oh, nice.
And I had somebody give these to me, and when I got them, I was like, "Ooh, those feel like really quality socks." But I will not wear them in the winter here, or I'm sorry, in the summer.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I
Just
would, but yeah.
I said that wrong. No, in the summer, I was like,
Yeah.
"Those are great winter socks," and even today, it's a little warm, but they work. So
Yes.
I thought these were really. I have never seen the Northern Lights. Like I've never gone to a place and seen them. It's something I want to see.
I was in Michigan a few weeks ago, and if you go far enough north in Michigan, you can actually see them. I wasn't far enough north, but I was like, it was tempting to get in a car and drive 4 hours. And I was in Norway and didn't see them. So I can tell you all the places I haven't seen them, but I have not I had the opportunity yet either. Yet.
Yeah, yet.
It's on the
It's one of
list.
those
So yeah. Yeah.
bucket list things. But
Yes,
it's like a bucket
exactly.
list thing that you can't totally plan out. Like you can try to go see them and not see it.
Yes, our daughter was in Iceland hoping to see them, and it was cloudy, and yeah, you didn't. So yeah, so you're right. You have to really plan enough time to, and then have a little bit of luck. So
Totally. All right, ready for me to jump into the
I
content?
am. So go for it.
And by the way, if anybody has any questions before I talk about the subject, just start typing them out and throw them in there. So I want to talk about something that uh, I've talked about a bit before, but I think it might be helpful if we dive into it a little bit deeper or a little differently, and that is consent and the imbalance of power in relationships. And and so like for instance, what I've tried to teach is that in a healthy relationship, we are on a peer-to-peer level with each other. Neither one of us has more power or less power than the other. Um, but so when we start to dive into this, what I often see in relationships when you have one partner that struggles with an addiction is that they often surrender their power in one sense or and ask their partner to like recover their power. And so what happens is, let's say you have somebody who has a sexually compulsive behavior. Well, in one sense, when they act out sexually, they're taking power that is unhealthy in the relationship, right? Or they use alcohol and they do it and they're hiding it. They're taking power and they're leaving the other person with a felt sense of like, what's wrong here? Something's wrong. I'm not getting the connection that I would normally need or want. And then when it's discovered that they have been using substances or acting out sexually, then they then have a ton of shame and they often give up their power. And then the spouse is left feeling like, okay, I have to take control. I have to take charge. And often inadvertently, the spouse feels like they have to become the parent. And the person struggling with addiction will give up the power because they're like, look, I can't do this on my own. I feel powerless. So you take over. Well, so then they try to take over, but then it's like, okay, now I'm being the parent and you're now the child. Well, nobody wants that. Like typically, right? Nobody wants that. And so um, they go through this dance of giving up power or having it taken from them, or giving it up, taking it, and rather than figuring out how to have a healthy, balanced relationship. And so if you think about it this way, an imbalance of power in the relationship could easily be one person in the relationship says, I control the sex. Whether we have sex or not, it's my control. Now, I'm not suggesting having sex when it doesn't like feel emotionally right or physically right, but there should be an equal communication and understanding and, if you will, relational agreement that we have in the relationship of what initiation of sex looks like, what the boundaries and rules in our relationship around sex looks like. Like, one of the things that I've found is that instead of asking, like, if a client comes in and says, my spouse did X, Y, and Z sexually, I will ask, like, how did that impact you? Rather than saying, oh, they had sex outside the marriage, that must be a betrayal. Because there are some couples that have a relational agreement that they're okay having sex outside the marriage as long as XYZ things are met. And maybe one rule might be that we both know about it. Okay, whatever it is. So I don't automatically go in and say, oh, you have betrayal trauma, right? Which is a judgment that I could easily carry, because in my relational agreement, that would be betrayal trauma. So instead, I ask questions. Well, how did that impact you? I often try not to use the word betrayal, because somebody might, like, I've worked with clients who have actually had their spouse sleep with sex workers or have sex with sex workers. They didn't just take naps.
That's true.
And
Yeah. I always say
and
they were slept with those, and I was like, did they really sleep? You know, I don't want to sound snarky, but like, if they were just sleeping, it might not have been as much of a problem. So yeah, it's the sanitized
right.
version.
What's wrong with sleeping?
Yeah.
Yeah, they had sex with sex workers, and the spouse was less upset about the sex with sex workers than they were upset that they weren't ever pursued by their spouse sexually. And so it's like, you can go pursue these sex workers. Well, the biggest betrayal wasn't sex outside of the relationship. It was that their sexual energy was being given to somebody else. Even though in this case, I think it was a bit of a betrayal, the biggest upset was, you've never given me your sexual energy our entire marriage. And so here you have a case of somebody who might actually be what we refer to as sexually addicted or sexually compulsive, and yet even in their own marriage, they're not pushing sex. And so that's why we have to be very careful with all these stereotypes. But in that case, the person having sex with sex workers had a lot of power because they weren't initiating, and they weren't allowing initiation to occur. So now the power is with the person who's least interested. Take another dynamic. If you have a relationship where maybe one partner acts out and they take all the sexual power, they hide it, sex is on their timetable, but then the other partner is like financially in control, because if I can't be in control sexually, then I'm going to take over financially. What we're trying to get to in a healthy relationship is where there is equal understanding, equal consent, discussions about what we spend our money on, agreeing. We're going to agree to spend our money here. We're going to agree to sex here and there under these conditions, right? We want to develop a peer-to-peer relationship where we're having these conversations. Otherwise, let's say if I hold all the control financially and I go to my spouse and I say, hey, we're going to buy this, and I don't care whether you're upset or not. And I go, okay, fine. Okay, so you agree? And I'm like, sure. Well, then it's like, well, you gave consent. Well, not really. I said fine because I didn't have a choice. And what we have to understand is that same thing occurs, like we talk about sex in that same way, and that same thing occurs like when we say, oh, hey, this person was at a party and they drank too much and they don't remember and they had sex. And it's like, actually, we call that a lack of consent, because somebody who had more understanding of what they were doing had sex with somebody who didn't have the ability to consent. You could even have two people who are inebriated and they end up having sex, and in some sense, did either one of them really consent? Right? Like, it sounds weird, but I want you guys to understand the dynamic that occurs, the imbalance of power that occurs. And it happens in all sorts of areas, not just sex. Am I comfortable? Like, for instance, if we teach our kids, you need to hug Aunt Sally and let her give you a nasty kiss on the lips because it's your Aunt Sally. Well, you're teaching your kids you don't have control of your body. You shouldn't you need to consent to kissing, you know, nasty Aunt Sally. And so that dynamic really does go into our adulthood and into our relationships. Well, that's why understanding our needs and understanding healthy boundaries is so important as we become adults, because if we don't even understand how we learned not to consent, how we learned not to be okay with our bodies and make choices for ourselves, we may have been spending many years in our marriage not consenting sexually and feeling like it's been, for lack of a better term, rapey, right? But that same concept applies financially. Do I give consent financially? Do I allow my money to be taken and spent in ways that I don't agree with? Now, I'm not suggesting this is easy. There is compromise that needs to definitely occur throughout relationships, but this happens through conversation. This happens through understanding and talking to our partner and saying, hey, have I crossed your boundaries? Did you feel like you gave consent? If you didn't, let's talk about it. I don't want to feel like I'm taking your power. That's going to feel, and I'm going to use a strong word here, abusive, right? And even if it's like, well, you didn't say no, it's more, help me understand why you didn't say no. I don't ever want you feeling that way. Right? The last thing I want is for there to be a non-consensual experience here. Or you could own, I enjoy having a non-consensual experience. It gives me a feeling of power, but now I'm realizing how much harm that may have caused, right? Like, this is where awareness becomes really important. And maybe this is way too deep of a conversation to be having for people if you're early in recovery. This is a really heavy conversation, and this takes a lot of awareness. But I've had clients get really upset when I've suggested to a spouse who very much has been abused, when I said, you need to own your power dynamic in the relationship. And they're like, how dare you tell me that I have power in this relationship? And I'm like, of course you have power. We all have power, and we all give away our power, right? And so what we need to be looking for is where that dynamic is shifting. I would say it's probably fairly rare that there aren't most marriages don't have that, some subtle changes of power, and it looks very different for everybody, and it's hard for me to point out, but I will say those are the moments that feel abusive. And that's why somebody who has been maybe an addict and been very abusive themselves will say, well, I feel abused. And it's like, great, let's talk about why you feel abused in that situation and how those feelings can be valid, but be very careful in telling your spouse that they're an abuser. Those labels make a lot of shame happen. So Tammy, this is lots I'm throwing out here. No questions have popped up totally. Well, maybe a little.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of questions, but I had a couple of questions for you because, like, because
yeah,
you were talking about, the you know like if the person who has addiction ends up giving the power to the betrayed partner, and so then the betrayed partner is now controlling things, and you're like, some of them do go, yeah, you need to take care of this. Others resent the control and feel like,
Oh, totally.
you are controlling me, and yeah, and so they're rebelling against the
Yes,
power struggle.
I tried to actually highlight that in the very beginning. When you're in a position of a healthy equality peer-to-peer in the relationship, and somebody takes power by like acting out and lying about it, or even acting out and then telling the truth, right? There still is a disruption of equality in the relationship. It will often force the partner, the betrayed partner, if you will, into a position of now feeling like I'm the parent. It doesn't mean they want that. It means they feel like I said, forced. It's like they now don't have a choice. Now I have to caretake you because you have acted out and you're in all of this shame. And they're kind of like, this feels gross. I don't want to be the mother.
And you've made my world unsafe. So
yes.
Therefore, I'm looking to take control of this to try to put some safety around it.
But I want to be very clear, because I'm not talking about a betrayed partner who takes control to try and feel safe. Yes, that happens. And it's unhealthy to try and control someone else to make safety. It happens. I think it's even more important that we talk about when that person feels powerless and helpless as, great, I'm the only adult in this situation. And if we're going to survive, I suddenly am not allowed to have my own needs. I'm not allowed to be hurt. I'm not allowed to be angry. I'm not allowed to ask you to comfort me. Right? So it's really important that this shifting of power isn't even like a conscious, intentful thing. That's why we want to start gaining awareness around it. And if you ever feel like I'm the parent, there's a sign. Why do I feel like the parent here? I don't want this. This is gross. Why do I feel like a child? I don't want this. This is gross. Right? Those are great signs to be able to say to your partner, hey, this feels like an imbalance of power because I feel like a parent. I feel like a child. I don't want this type of a relationship. Do you feel it too? Right now we start to try and figure out how to come back together. Now, but also we might be in a relationship where I say, hey, I want you to take care of the finances. I'm going to take care of, I'm just going to make something up, the house maintenance and the yard work and whatever. Like I'm just making this up because I couldn't think of anything else really quickly. That's not an imbalance of power. That's you guys saying, here's our division. As long as neither one of you is building up resentment, then you have an equal relationship. You've just decided together what you're going to do or not do.
Yeah, but that's actually a partnership, because now we're like, there's all these things that need to be done, and as long as we mutually agree on how they're going to get done, that all works. When you said, you've given away your power, but I also think there are places in relationships where somebody goes, yeah, I want what I want, and I'm going, like you said, you basically kind of coerced into, well, of course you agreed with me. Well, so finding that, so I can understand how a partner might go, I didn't give this away,
Right.
like this was taken from me. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, like I just thought of an example, but I might be completely off here. But let me share it with you, and then you tell me if this fits. I've seen relationships where, let's say there's a partner who has a higher desire for sex, and let's say that partner is also bringing in either all or the bulk of the financial income. And I've seen where that partner will go to the spouse and say, we need to have sex a minimum of this many times in a week. And anything more than that, I will pay you this much money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I've seen that. And I've seen the other partner go, sweet, you pay me, I'll take it. Right. And I look at that, and again, if you guys are comfortable with that, cool. But in my mind, the way, if I went to my wife and said that, she would be like, wait, you're going to pay me my money to have sex. Like, and why I say that is because in my wife and my relationship, there is no his and her money. Any money I bring in is our money. Like, that's how we both see it. And so that would be a weird power dynamic, right? And if I took financial control and was that tight with my wife, she might feel like, well, I don't have a choice. He's taking control. I don't have access to the bank accounts. I don't have usernames and passwords, right? And I've seen people stay in abusive relationships because financially they don't have any control. And so then they say, yeah, I consented to all of those things, but I didn't have a choice, right? That would be an example where I did all of those things because I didn't feel I had a choice in order to get my need met. And so they're going to feel, for lack of a better word, icky, resentful, because it's like, to me, right, that's not how a relationship should work. And again, if you guys are comfortable with it, then you've reached a marital or relational agreement that works for you. And then we don't have a problem.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking,
that answer the question, Tammy?
What? Yeah, it does. And you know, I there was a quote, and I have it somewhere on my desk. But you know, in order to choose to stay, I have to know that I can leave. It's something along those lines. And
Yep.
you know, basically, I think that's what you're talking about here. Is, you know, I have to, I have to know I have a choice. And if I
Right.
don't have a choice, then it does feel like this is happening to me, and the power imbalance is in place. And then it's not really a partnership or a real relationship,
Right.
you know, because there's always that imbalance.
Now, you can even take it a little bit further. I've seen partners stay because culturally, in our culture, that divorce is shunned, or divorce is, my family will disown me because nobody in my family gets a divorce, or nobody within my religion or faith gets a divorce, and so then I stay because the shame is worse, or like I said earlier, I stay because financially they will wreck me, right? Like, so you get to this space where there can be all sorts of power dynamics that aren't even necessarily inside the relationship. But if you aren't choosing to stay because you could leave, that's a dangerous place for a partner to be. I actually tell my partners that the healthiest thing you can do is realize you could leave at any time, but you choose to stay because you're wanting to figure out how to make it work. And when that hope goes away and you're like, look, I can peacefully choose to end the relationship, then I'm good. Then go ahead. But if you're, it's like leaving out of anger. Don't leave out of anger. Don't leave to throw a tantrum. Leave from a place of peace. That's where it's not about power.
Well, anger or hurt, you know, anything that is reactive, you know, that is not, you know, thought through, you know, using your real brain, you know, any decision that I make in a reactionary, like, oh, you hurt my feelings, so therefore I'm getting a divorce. You know, I mean, whatever it is, you know, is again not looking at it in, you know, in a healthy way. You know, I see a lot of people who choose to leave the relationship, and I always say, when your head and your heart are aligned, you know, that's when you know. But then you also, like, you've processed it through. It isn't just, you know, it isn't that reactionary aspect. So there are some questions, and I think you're going to be able to elaborate on some of these. Sounds like you're talking about mutuality. Please say more.
Well, so this one's tough because in my mind, I'm like, I've said a bunch. So I'm wondering if there's any specific questions about that. I think if I were just to sum it up, we should not be in a relationship feeling like we aren't comfortable with the level of equality. And that goes back to, I've seen spouses get scared and feel like, I have to take control here. Now, for instance, I'm just trying to think of examples that it's hard to give examples, but sometimes it's a little bit scary. If I feel like I have a client that's in an abusive situation and they're telling me I've been hiding money so that I can feel good enough to get away, then I'm like, hey, look, if that's what you need to do to get away safely, do it, right? But generally, if we're actually trying to work on a relationship, there shouldn't ever be hiding of money, right? Like, and so I have to be careful, because if somebody's in an abusive relationship and they need to get out, then hide all the money you need. Once you have enough, get out, like, be done. But generally, when we're working on a healthy relationship, we are looking for equality, mutuality. But please ask me more specific questions. I think it would be easier for me to elaborate if I understood maybe some of the areas that were of difficulty.
Yeah, well, that was, I think, a really important differentiation of, like, in a relationship that you're looking to strive to be together, then then we do want to work on those things. But if it's an abusive relationship, then yeah, do what you need to do to protect yourself.
You're done with the relationship. If you're
Mhm.
done, I don't mean this in a bad way. Who cares about equality? Like, leave, right?
Mhm.
Let your lawyers figure out equality.
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
use a mediator, because that's a whole lot less expensive. But like,
Yeah, if you can, yes, yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay, so the next one: does the essay use sexual neglect with the betrayed partner as a form of manipulation?
well, that's a great question. They could, sure. I've seen that before. I've also seen it that they're just unhealthy. They don't know how to engage in a sexual relationship on an equality level. And so, truthfully, their libido, their lack of desire, their ability to even maybe have an erection or be sexually aroused isn't there, because they've never fostered that in an equal relationship. And so it's really hard. I've seen sexual neglect be a total tool of manipulation to punish a partner, but I've seen that on both sides, whether it's a betrayed partner, whether it's an addict, if you will, right? Like, so it's so difficult to say absolutely they can, but we don't know. They may not even know that that's what they're doing, but it certainly can be done. It can also be their shame around their own sexuality, their inability to explore their own sexuality and sexual desires with an equal partner. It's way too vulnerable. And so there's a lot of sexual dysfunction that could be going on there, that for me to even give you a percentage of how much of that's manipulation would be wrong of me to do.
Yeah. Well, and I think fear. I mean, I hear often the fear of, like you said, this is a foreign territory, because, if the sexual acting out was transactional, I've paid someone, like, there's no fear with that. Like, I don't have to show up in a vulnerable and intimate way. I'm paying for services. That's very different than being, with a significant other that I love and care about. And now, there's all of this fear around it. There also can be, medical issues. Who knows? That would be a great one to have the conversation about. And particularly if you guys are a little ways down the path, it isn't like, the very early stages of all of this, because figuring all of that out would be important for your healing as a couple too. Okay. Can you talk about basic human needs and the right to have them met?
Yes, I can. The reality of it is there's a lot of basic human needs. So the four main categories are physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual. And within, like, physical, which is really easy to understand for most people, you have like food, clothing, shelter, touch, um, exercise, like all that. Like, and I could keep going. Um, and under emotional, you're gonna have like self-worth, viewing self as productive, even exposure to nature under emotional, which is really important.
Hmm.
Then relational, you have like, um, to love and be loved, to value and be valued, appreciation, mutual appreciation. I mean, there's a lot of things that fall under basic relational needs. And then under spiritual, you have like trying to figure out how to say this, like a connection to something greater than yourself, which could even be Mother Nature, right? Like, or to humanity as a whole. It could be obviously a higher power. Under spiritual, there's things like, having hope. I could go on, but if somebody in our relationship is taking away our basic human rights, whatever they are, the ability to consent, honestly, I think is a basic human right. If somebody's taking away our physical safety and they're harming us, if somebody's taking away our sexual safety, and some of that could be my partner's having risky sex and now exposing me to sexual disease or whatever else, right? That I'm essentially not consenting to, right? You have to look and go, there are a lot of basic needs and rights that we all have. And that's where we have to decide as a person, how many of those rights and needs can I go without before I say I'm out, right? Like, I think any of us could look in our relationship and recognize I have some deficits with needs. And so I need to work with my partner on helping to fulfill my needs. And I need to talk to my partner on their unmet needs. And we need to work together to help each other get our needs met. Right? And so I think that's really important. You're never going to be in a relationship where all of your needs are getting met perfectly. But as partners, we are both mutually desiring that we both get our needs met. It shouldn't be my needs are more important than yours. No, my needs and your needs and our needs together are mutually important. And so I think the point at which we might say I'm out of the marriage or I'm out of the relationship is that point at which where we don't feel like my needs are capable of being met. I mean, if you're dating somebody and you realize, man, they don't have the capacity for the type of person that I want in my life to be able to have the depth emotionally that I would want. You know what? I'm going to break up with them and try and find somebody else. That same thing could be there. They don't have the ambition to financially make as much money as I want to make as a married couple or as a relational partner. And so I'm going to go find somebody else. Like, you have that right. Tammy, any other thoughts?
Well, yeah, no, I was thinking, but like, we are not like, it is a setup for failure if we expect our significant relationship to be the 100% meet all of our needs. I am far more social than my husband, go figure. And so, and that's all fine. And he permits me to go do social things with other people that, I've got groups of friends that, and I go hiking and he doesn't want to hike with, like all of these things. We have different things, we have different things that we do, and we have, they're all, agreed upon on, some level. It's all good. We respect each other's space for those to go get our needs met in those, particular ways, so we both go to the gym. I go to the group classes because they're social. He goes to the gym and does, and fine. I would never go do that, and he won't do mine, and it's okay. But we're both getting our needs met, and we're not expecting the other person to 100% do everything that we need, the same way. That's, what helps us be good partners for each other. So I think understanding what our needs are and understanding where we can support our partners, and then what, having other people that, fill up, some of those gaps in a healthy way. It's why we say addicts having having a tribe of people, that are supporting them, peer support, for the recovery work, partners having peer support, for the healing journey. That helps us, get our basic needs met, even when, especially early in the process, being the support for each other is probably not safe, and not really working for each other. Okay, Can you speak more about the shame around their own sexuality with an equal partner?
Yep,
You mentioned
that's a
that. Yeah.
great question.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
I did. I mentioned it briefly in my answer. So it is not uncommon for so let's use the dynamic of somebody who has developed sexual compulsivity in their life. I'm going to make a sweeping generalization here, but let's say that somebody who has sexual compulsivity in their life has not had a very healthy sexual development. And so they don't have a very healthy sexual development, and they get into a relationship and act out sexually, and therefore acting outside of the relational agreements in the marriage, and other, harmful things to the relationship, whether they're spoken or unspoken agreements in the relationship. Well, when that's been exposed, you have to consider that what's also been exposed is their deep inadequacy as a sexual partner. Now, I believe culturally that, and I'm going to say this and it's going to sound kind of strong, I believe culturally that it would appear that men tend to have more space in the culture to develop sexually and talk about their sexuality and being sexual, and that especially maybe within more of a Judeo-Christian framework, women maybe feel like, oh, I need to submit, that sort of thing. And so here you have this framework where somebody has this poor sexual development, especially if you have maybe a wife who is like, well, I don't know a lot about sex. And so you're kind of in charge sexually, and, oh, men are, sex crazed horn dogs, and I just need to submit. Otherwise he'll go find it somewhere else, which is total garbage. I had to censor my words there.
I know where you were going, and I agree. Yeah. So yeah.
So, but what I'm saying is, so then there's all sorts of dynamics what that could occur here. I don't know anybody, I can speak to all sorts of possibilities. But then you have essentially now this individual who has been exposed for being terribly sexually inadequate, underdeveloped, filled with shame around their sex and sexuality. And I when I say sexuality, I more just mean their sexual expression, their sexual self, right? And so now they've been exposed. Well, all that shame comes to the surface. So you might, as a partner, want to engage sexually, like, hey, let's work on rebuilding our sexual relationship. And they're like, I can't. All of my shame prevents me from being sexually vulnerable. Forget, and I'm talking physically vulnerable. I haven't even jumped into emotionally vulnerable. Really? We need to talk about this? No, they don't know how to do that. And so emotional vulnerability, sexual vulnerability, like Tammy said earlier, one of the biggest things that decreases sexual ability, like even sexual arousal, is fear, right? And so fear is a programming in our brain that when we feel fear, arousal goes away. There are some exceptions, but it's typically trained into us in some way if we enjoy fear and arousal, just FYI. And so shame is all about fear of self, fear of being seen, fear of you knowing who I really am. And so they might have a complete loss of sexual ability just because it's like, well, you now see who I really am sexually. You see how shameful I've been sexually. You see how disconnected I've been, how outside of my own moral incongruity I've been sexually. And so you think they're going to come in with confidence to the sexual relationship? No, right? Like, it's that I hate to give a visual, but it's like, you think the penis is going to be erect? It's going to, it's not going to work. Physically, it's not going to work because they have to actually work through so much of the emotional parts of them to even figure out, like, what were my attitudes and feelings and behaviors around touch as a kid? What were my attitudes, feelings, and behaviors around sex? When did we talk about sex? When did we not? Can I talk about making mistakes sexually? Can I talk about the things I don't like sexually and the things I really like sexually? Right. And if none of this is happening, and most of this is happening when you have a sexually compulsive person, they are not going to be able to show up sexually in the relationship. Right. They are just going to be a lump on a log, a very non-erect log, right? Like, sorry, it was kind of funny to me, but like,
no, it is no, but I feel I hear you, and you're right, and you know, that isn't even taking into consideration like co-occurring. Many people are using chemicals, and you know, and so now they've
oh
stopped
yeah,
the
when you get
chemicals
into
and all
like
of that. Yeah, or
chemsex,
porn. Yes, yeah,
right?
or
The
I
other thing
always
is,
use porn right before we had sex. While their images
or
are, you know, yeah.
right. The other thing you also have is that they, let's say they're used to drinking before they have
Mm-hmm,
sex, and that drinking can bring down some anxiety, and
mm-hmm,
then allow sexual performance to happen. You know, obviously, if you drink too much, you're going to kill sexual performance
mm-hmm.
to some degree as well. But like, there are so many things they've got to relearn and untrain. They may have trained themselves where the only way they feel sexual arousal is through their own dominance or through their own submission. And so having an equal relationship is like, not even, it's never even hardly been developed, if at all, because they're used to dominance or they're used to submission.
Yeah, well,
Does
and I
that,
was thinking, yeah,
hopefully
no, it
you,
does. But I want to go there. Hope is not all lost. You know, like, you know, that it just takes
oh
work.
no,
Yeah. But, you know, like we talk often on these things where like sensate, focus, touch. And how do you know, how do you back it all up so it isn't just like, well, I'm going for sex. No, it's like, how do you back up and start having, you know, connective touch that, you know, is non-sexual so that you start building, you know, a pathway to, you know, what do we like? You having a conversation, because what I think of so often is the lack of communication. Like, we aren't going to talk about, we're just going to have sex, you know, and so that they're, you know, like this whole thing of like such an important, it's like finances. These are really important issues in a relationship. So having a discussion about some of these things, and it's terrifying, you know, and so how do you just, you know, find a safe space to have, you know, some conversations about things so that, you know, you can eventually, you know, find a place where it's mutually agreeable. So, okay, next one. I thought I had the kind of relationship where I asked my partner to meet my needs, and where he couldn't, I was able to meet my needs with others, family and friends. To learn my partner was meeting whatever needs were there by sexually acting out has made it really hard to be a gracious assumption of, you know, to him now. What needs to happen in a relationship to get back to the point where I feel safe enough to give him a gracious assumption?
that's such a thoughtful question.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think there is room for gracious assumptions right now. And really, it's starting to have gracious assumptions about, like, why were you sexually acting out, and what needs did you think you were trying to get met? So I think there's always room for gracious assumption, but it's figuring out at what level right now do I need to give a gracious assumption. So like, I may not be at a space that I can give a gracious assumption where I say, you can go on a business trip without me, right? Like, you know, unfortunately, that's too scary for me. So I'll just plan some time off and you go on a business trip, and I'll do this while you do that, or whatever else, right? Um, like there's you. So I guess I'm a little concerned that what you're, you know, saying is, when do I make myself vulnerable to trust? And we're always making ourselves vulnerable to trust, but we're doing it in pieces, as opposed to um like giving full vulnerability right away. I've told partners this before, and they never like hearing it usually, and that is, You have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to let them hurt you worse than they've ever hurt you before. And I always have to very quickly say that doesn't happen immediately. Like, it's healthy to give a little bit and then see if they can if you can trust them with that. Then give a little more and see if you can trust them with that. What we know is that I'm being healthy by continuing to give a little bit more and a little bit more, until eventually I go, wow, I'm giving them more vulnerability than I ever have before. This feels amazing. And it would appear I can trust them. That feels fantastic. It feels like that's really what you're asking, but I'm not entirely sure. I think you do it slowly and carefully. That would be my answer. Give back as much trust as you can and see what they do with it. And then give a little more and see what they do with it. And so the gracious assumptions get bigger and bigger. The trust gets bigger and bigger over time. But I think it's important that they work with you on creating that trust and safety.
Yeah.
Tammy, are you reading it differently than I am?
Yeah, no, I thought my gracious assumption would be that I'm believing that, you know, you did this out of your brokenness and not, you know, to hurt me. That might be where I start with a gracious assumption, is like, you
Right.
know, the behaviors were out of a place of brokenness. You weren't doing this to hurt me. And then if you start going like, yeah, I can believe that. Okay, then, you know, then it's like, okay, what's the next little tiny layer that you
Right.
can, you know, like smearing a little butter on? What little
And
tiny layer can you?
it might even be, I did do this to hurt you because I'm so broken. Like,
Yeah. And
right?
I mean, I think that there are some that are malicious and, you know, and do things out of maliciousness, but that's not my
Oh,
vast
I think,
experience, you
no,
know?
I would agree with you, but I'm just even leaving room for that to occur.
Okay.
But yeah, I totally hear you. I think a huge gracious assumption can often be, man, if you weren't doing this to hurt me, can you help me understand why you were doing this?
Yeah. And I don't like the why questions. I don't find that, because most of the time an addict can't really can't get to that, or some of them even know why and they keep acting out. So to me, it's like, you know, what can we do to move forward? How can we, you know, proceed? I find to be more useful, but yeah, it's like, you know, what need did you perceive was being met by doing that, you know? And it maybe I just needed to numb out. I don't know. Again, kind of what I'm making up. So the next one, Matt. So could a PA who has kept their addiction hidden while having intercourse with a partner be a covert way of domination?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the obvious answer here is yes, it could be. It doesn't mean it is. I think that question is an excellent question for the partner, right? Like, meaning the person with the addiction. To basically say, hey, was there ever a feeling of domination there for you, that you knew you were keeping a secret and you were doing it anyway? Was there any part of that was part of your, you know, even arousal template? You know, I mean, it might be a better question done in therapy with somebody who can explore it with them. And the truth is, it totally could be, and they may not even have the awareness of it yet to go, yeah, there was part of it that was really exciting, to know that I was acting out and you didn't know, and that I could have a sense of power. That's actually part of what I was saying at the beginning, is that somebody can act out as a way of like, you don't own me, I can control my own destiny, almost like a child would rebel. This is my way of showing that I'm an adult, even though it's really immature, you know?
It feels
So,
a little passive aggressive. Am I wrong
oh,
on that?
totally,
Yeah.
totally. But like, and so I guess I just throw it out there that it absolutely can be a way. I always have to be careful because I just want to make sure it's clear. It doesn't mean it is, right? Like, that's where each individual has to go deep within themselves to try and figure out what the dynamics are. And I think somebody could be in recovery 5 years, 10 years before they really go, wow, I realized there was some domination going on there, right? Like, it's this understanding that we spend years not only developing our sexual selves, but also undeveloping and redeveloping. And so it may take a lot of time. And I think it's okay for a partner to say, I have a hunch that this was a covert way of dominating. And so I'm going to make sure that if I'm willing to engage sexually, that I don't that I don't feel dominated, regardless of what might be going on for them. Right? Because even whether they're dominating or not, I don't want to put myself in a position of being dominated. And so here's what I'm going to be exploring sexually to make sure that I feel comfortable with every choice I'm making.
Well, and there's that
helps
communication stuff again, where you're going like, I'm gonna talk about these things, you know. I think it's just so important. But yeah, I was thinking when you're talking about it could be, 5-10 years. And I thought, yeah, because like my first thought was, if you ask an addict that, they're gonna go, huh? Because like it'll be such a disconnect of, but yeah, like if they are feeling powerless in a relationship or at work or whatever, how can I get power back? Like, and again, all of this is behind the scenes. This is not, I'm not making a conscious decision of like, yes, I'm going to go do these. It's like, how can I make myself feel better? That's the, I'm just going to go to the same compulsive things that have worked for me in all these other ways. So, and I hear often too, and I'm sure you do too, Matt, that, partners feel like I'm part of the porn. So, when there's a porn addict, that can be playing out as well. So I think figuring out how you do things that help you feel safe as you re-engage.
It's interesting because over the years working with people who have been like porn addicts, over the years, I've discovered that most of them aren't using their partner when they're having sex with their partner. Most of them aren't using their partner as an object. Now, it does not mean that you as a partner don't feel objectified, right? Because you still may not be getting the connected type of sex that you're wanting and hoping for and that you feel you deserve. But it's interesting how often I've talked with people and explored it, and they've said, no, rarely ever have I used my partner. And so I say that because I want to let my betrayed partners know that you need to own, and it's totally acceptable for you to say, I feel objectified. But you can't always say you're using me as your porn. It would be more of a question. How often did you use me as an object where it wasn't about connection? Because having sex with your partner is way more vulnerable than looking at porn or having sex with a sex worker, right? Like it's way more vulnerable to have sex with your partner who can actually reject you, who can actually, if you will, hurt you. And so often, even if you have a very disconnected addict, for instance, that sexual experience often was a level of connection that they've rarely experienced, and it's super vulnerable for them, even if they're super disconnected and you're like, that's vulnerability? That doesn't even make sense. So I just wanted to be careful and kind of clarify that a little bit.
No, I appreciate that, because like I tend to hear it from partners. So what I hear you saying though is the partner could feel like that's happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the addict is perceiving as happening. So there can be a disconnect, and it can be fear, from a partner standpoint, that I'm afraid you're using me like that too, because that's all you've been doing, or a lot of what you've been doing. So I hear what you're saying is to check in with both people to see if that's happening, not just because it feels like it doesn't mean it really is.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with a partner saying, hey, whether you are or not, I feel objectified right now. And can we talk about that? Rather than saying, you have objectified me. Well, you don't know that. I mean, maybe very rightfully so. But again, healthy relationships are me owning what's happening for me and checking in and asking what they're experiencing. Again, if they have a high enough awareness to be able to even answer.
Yeah. Oh, that's helpful. So, We have time for one more quick question if anybody's got one. Otherwise, the November schedule, so October is still good, but the November schedule will be a little bit different. We'll have the 3rd and the 17th. Matt will be back on the 17th, but the other weekends or the other Fridays in November will not be. They should be accurately displayed on the calendar on our website. This will be posted on our website too.
So in October, so in November, you're only going to see me on the 17th, right? That's
yes, and you're going to see Debbie on the 3rd, and those are the only two for the Friday one. So we've got one more question. Can you explain intimacy, anorexia in context of addiction?
Sure, I'll try and do it quickly. But the idea is, and I'm gonna probably hack this up a little bit, like anorexia with food, for instance, is often can be considered a form of self-harm. It can be considered a form of like self control in an effort to get a handle on whatever's going on. Emotional irregularity, a lack of outside control and control of self or whatever, or feeling like they have abuse going on in their life. And so but I can control what I eat. And so that's probably a terrible, there's probably somebody who could explain that way better. But I want you to consider that like sexual anorexia, or I guess you're saying intimacy anorexia. Intimacy anorexia would be like, I can control the level of intimacy that I put out. And if you are saying intimacy as in sexual, I can control my sexual behavior. And that way I won't let it get out of control again. And so if you have one end of the spectrum over here is out of control sexual behavior, the other unhealthy end of the spectrum would be like over control, which would be sexual anorexia. And so somebody who's sexually anorexic will absolutely limit, no sexual behavior as a way of gaining control. And that's not healthy. We want something in the middle, just like we would with eating. You don't want overeating. You don't want anorexia. You want healthy eating in the middle, whatever that balance looks like. And so what happens is you have somebody that's in an addiction, in this feeling of being out of control, and they are moving into anorexia just to try and feel like they have some control. And do they have control? You bet they have control. But they have so much control that it's a dam waiting to be burst. And so it's over control rather than a regulated flow or a generalized flow, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. Yeah. And I, I hear Dr. Robbins said this a number of times too, people that go, yeah, I've got 10 years, sobriety in, an S program. And, how many relationships have they had? Zero, like they completely shut down. And that's not the goal, just like Matt was saying with food. It's like, in order to live, you got to have some food. You have to have calories, all of those things. But we also want to be connected. And, sex addiction is an intimacy disorder. So getting help to be on a different place with that, then we can be in a relationship with other people in a real and meaningful way. We can be willing to be vulnerable and connect with people. So just shutting down, keeps us safe, but it doesn't keep us, it doesn't bring us joy. I mean, relationships bring us joy, they bring us pain, but they bring us joy. The connection is, really where I think we're not just me. Dr. Stantakin talks about relationships and partnerships. I mean, that's what we're really geared towards as, human beings. So we're keeping ourselves too safe is the problem. So, okay. Yep. So thank you, Matt. Great to see you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I said we all need a certain level of risk and vulnerability, and it's scary, but it's important for real healthy
Yeah.
intimacy.
Yeah, yeah. You know, the old saying, which is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I think of that, honestly, I think of that often because I was like,
Yeah.
you know, have I been burned? Have I been hurt? Sure. And you know what? But I've also had great joy, you know, and I wouldn't trade that, you know. You know, it's not fun in the moments when there's pain, but I still wouldn't trade it. So thank
Yeah,
you.
for
Thanks
sure.
everybody for the great questions. We'll be back.
All right,
Bye.
see ya.